Welcome everyone this afternoon. Thank you for joining us today at the last installment of our workshop series for Nsf Grfp application preparation. This final workshop is an open forum for any questions that you might have about Nsf Grfp, the application process, being a student, if you're offered this, what that will look like, any questions that you might have. We have a wonderful panel of wonderful experts in this area to chat with us today. We have Dean Kita, Dr. Tony Butterfield, Dr. Anthea Letso, and a current NSF graduate fellow, Nicole Zenas. So why don't we just take a quick moment and why don't we go through in that order if you want to say a few words of introduction and maybe what your experience is with NSF, such as you were an NSF student or you've coached students, you've been a PI on NSF grants, etc. And we'll go ahead and start with Dean Kita.
Hi, so I'm Dave Kita. I'm the Dean of the Graduate School. I'm also a professor of physics and astronomy. I've been funded by the National Science Foundation for the past 33 years. I've been at the University of Utah, and I do research, observational astronomy research. I've also served on NSF panels for science, as well as the NSF GRFP over the last 7 years. And so I don't know if it's discussed a little bit about the panel structure, but I'd be glad to say a few words about that at some point, because I'll tell you a little bit about how the proposals are received, how they're ranked, and how the discussions go. I'd be glad to talk about that. If somebody has a question or just is curious about that, please speak up and answer. Speak up and ask. Thank you.
Okay, Tony? Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. Can't even tell if my mouth is moving with the mask though. I'm a professor of chemical engineering. I've been doing GRFP workshops for about the past 7 years. Since we started doing them, we went from having one winner ever to one every year. So I would hope that a lot of you would take advantage of that. I'm going to put into the chat a sign-up form for the workshop I'll be doing in the fall. I haven't set dates yet, but if you're interested, please sign up. And I've also been NSF funded and on NSF panels, GRFP as well.
Hey, Dr. Letso.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anthea Letsu, and I am a professor in the Department of Human Genetics up at the med school. Like my colleagues, I have served on panels, basic research, as well as GFRP. I've actually chaired those panels because for about 3 years, about 5 years ago, I split my time between the University of Utah and the National Science Foundation, where I served as a program director for developmental biology, as well as science advisor for a portion of the biology directorate. And like my colleagues, have been funded by the NSF, so can field a wide variety of questions and happy to help out if I can.
Thank you. And Nicole, a brief introduction.
Hi, I'm Nikki Zenas. I'm currently a fourth-year student, starting my 5th year. I'm in the ecology half of the School of Biological Sciences, working with Dr. William Anderegg on climate change, drought, and forest mortality. I received the GRFP coming into the University of Utah. I took 2 years off after undergrad and applied. And I have to say, it's been a really great experience. It gives you a lot of extra time for research without worrying about TAing and other duties and getting outside sources of funding. So I'm happy to answer questions about the application process and personal statements and your research proposals.
Perfect. Thank you, Nikki. So we have some questions to go ahead and get started with. As you have questions that you have for our panelists, whether someone in particular or just the panel at large, you can go ahead and drop them into our chat box. The time is yours, so please ask any questions that you might have about this process, about the fellowship, anything that does come to mind. So one of the first questions I have for our panel is, describe for us the value of the NSF GRFP. There is the value, of course, of there's a stipend, there's some research money. That's all very valuable right now. How can the NSF GRFP kind of pay off long term? Is there prestige that's associated with this? For those students who might have other funding options, why is this maybe the better option to take?
Well, I'm glad to say something about it. It's, obviously it's a selective fellowship and it's nationally recognized. It comes with a generous stipend. The University of Utah also provides some money to the student from an educational allowance for you to be able to do things, go to conferences, buy some things every year that you're on your fellowship. So again, it gives you a little bit of a budget that you can manage as well, which is great for your research. It actually allows you to do things that you wouldn't have access to that type of funding as a TA, or else maybe not even as an RA sometimes. The NSF actually discusses there are other opportunities once you've become an NSF GRFP. You can have access to supercomputer facilities. They also have internship programs for NSF GRFPs to work in industry to do product development if that's appropriate. And so they have special funds for doing that. And they also have international travel that's open only to NSF GRFPs. Is a program that allows you to get access to do those things. So again, it opens up a number of different funding streams to you as a graduate student that a regular graduate student really doesn't have access to. The last thing is NSF tracks these NSF GRFP throughout their lifetime of the student's career after they graduate. And if you go to a university to become a professor, there is special consideration. Maybe Anthea can talk a bit more about this. I've only heard about this, but there's some special consideration for NSF GRFP students. They'd like to see them succeed. And so somehow it influences their first grants. And I'm not sure how that process works, but maybe Anthea could say a little bit about it. Maybe you're more likely to get a grant or something if you've had this as an experience.
So I can't add too much to what you've already said, David. I think it probably changes from directorate to directorate in terms of, so for you guys who might not understand, there's a biology directorate, there's a chemistry, and so for all our broad sciences, we have different directorates. But I think Dave is absolutely correct in that there's always a place for you to put in that you've had prior funding and the results from that funding. So it's not points against you if you haven't, but of course there are points for you if you have. So I would say very generally though, in terms going back to the original question, that it's always, and this is sort of a flavor of that, it's never too early to establish an independent record of funding. It's a snowball effect, and be it NSF funding or NIH funding or a different foundation funding, having established that record of funding is brownie points when you apply for a job. It's brownie points when you apply for that next grant. So I think that is another prestige element to obtaining money. And if life interferes also, the money follows you. So if we don't want to see you leave the University of Utah, but if you had to, the money follows you, it doesn't follow us.
Wonderful, thank you. I have a couple questions that have come in about the application documents. So 2 different points here. One on letters of recommendation. Who should applicants be asking to provide letters of recommendation? Is there a hard and fast rule of thumb, or is there some flexibility that you might have some guidance on? And then part 2 of questions so far on documents comes down to the review. We have personal statements, we have the research plan and such. Is it permissible to have a PI or other peers review those statements before you submit them?
I'll start here. Short answers, I think. So if you have chosen your research advisor, you should, and you state that you've chosen a research advisor, you should have a letter of recommendation from that person. If you've done past research, as an undergraduate, and you spent 2 years working in a lab, you should have a letter from that person as well. If you don't, people are going to wonder where it is, and they're going to wonder where it is, and it'll hurt you a little bit. That said, you may not want a letter you may have had a bad experience in someone's lab. I suggest that you address that in your personal statement. Say, had a great time working in the lab, but this is not the person to write a letter for you. So don't leave an obvious gap in your application without explaining it. And then I think you asked, is it fair to have peers or faculty members and advice? You absolutely should do this. Do not send a grant in that hasn't been proofed extensively, and give your critics plenty of time to do a good job critiquing your application, but well before it goes in. Better to hear it from a friend, a colleague, than to hear it from a review committee.
So I would just like to add, I'm very glad that that is not frowned upon, because that's exactly what we do in the fall. Is we basically do a writing workshop for your personal statement and your research statement, and we do peer review of those. And yeah, I couldn't see how you could send a successful application in without having somebody else take a look at it. I would also want to add, your PI absolutely has to know what you're proposing, because in their letter, they are asked to state that this is an original idea of yours, and this is just like you taking one of their ideas. So they have to know what's in there for them to write an effective letter of recommendation.
Perfect, thank you. And Tony, a question for you here, because in your role over in the College of Engineering, you work with both undergrad and graduate students. We've got a mix of those here with us today. We've got some undergrad students who are looking forward to when they apply to graduate school and start their graduate education. We have some who've already started. Are there special considerations that they should have that are specific to an undergrad, or that some guidance that would be specific for a graduate student?
I would say, keep in mind that they are judged differently. So a second year grad student is going to be held to different expectations than a senior. But there's always something that they could be working on. If you're not in the lab, get in the lab. If you're in a lab and you're just doing busy work like cleaning glassware, let your PI know that you want to be working towards a publication or a presentation. You need to be authoring their letter of recommendation and adding something of deep value to their lab that they can talk about when they write that letter of reference for you. One area that I think it's neglected quite a bit is the broader impacts of your personal statement and your research statement. So if you have just been cloistered in a laboratory and you're working on this really technical issue and you're not even sure what the societal benefit of this is going to be, pin that down, try to get this research out into the community, try to engage underrepresented groups in STEM, and just really show that you care about the profession as a whole and bringing people into it. And that will make for a much stronger personal statement.
So one of the things that should be mentioned with the review process, we get so faculty are solicited by the National Science Foundation to be on the panels, and they typically do it about this time of year. They ask us if we want to be on the panel or not, and then they review our CV, see if we have appropriate credentials, and then if they do, they invite us to be on the panel sometime in the early summer, and then we don't hear from them until about December, in which time we receive a large number of proposals to read over. But they do it in a very unusual way. They first say, we're only going to look at the seniors. And so we're not allowed to look at the first year, second year, or else the last one is untraditional or non-traditional graduate students. We're not allowed to look at any of those, because if we can compare them together, you might actually disadvantage those seniors. So we have to get all of our grades in for our seniors first and grade them, and after that, then we're allowed to go look at the graduate students. And so they really are considered separately. They're the same judges, but they're considered separately between the two. They started this about 2 years ago, and it's been very effective in making sure that the undergraduates are treated in a different way. They have a different perspective. They don't know where they're going to go to graduate school many times. and they might have only just started graduate or started research rather than having extensive depth. And so again, they have to be considered in a little bit different light than a first or a second year graduate student.
I would also say as like as a person who applied, I wasn't a senior still, but I was not in grad school. If there is someone you want to work with, even though you haven't been accepted, I still found it valuable to reach out to them in terms, especially the broader impacts. So I had not joined Dr. Andereg's lab yet, but I had reached out to him expressing interest in being in his lab and asked him for advice on developing my research proposal. And I found that very useful, and he was very accommodating, even though he had no idea if I was actually joining his lab, you know, a couple months down the road.
Perfect, thank you. I have a scenario question that was submitted, and again, please continue putting your questions in the chat box. These are great questions. This spring and summer, I have been working on 2 unrelated projects with 2 different faculty. Should I include only the project that has made more progress in my GRFP application, or include both?
I go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask a point of clarification. Then did I miss it? Did the applicant state where they are, if they're a graduate student or a senior applying?
Utah grad student. So they're a grad student. Mhm.
Tony, I'll let you do it.
I was just going to say, if both those PIs are going to be writing letters of reference, I would talk about both experiences. You don't want something to come out in the blue in a letter of reference. And plus, it shows that I don't know, you're ambitious. You're in 2 labs. I think it'd be worth talking about, even if you really wanted to highlight one over the other.
I think that there's a common element between the 2. So you must have decided to work in both those labs for some reason. I think thinking about that for a little bit higher level than just I'm working in these 2 labs, like why was I interested in these 2 things? What made me have an interest in spending time in each one of those? And perhaps bringing that out could actually strengthen the application quite a lot. It would explain why you're working in 2 labs rather than just being some kind of happenstance type of thing.
And so this leads to another question. I've in multiple of the sessions that we've had for the application preparation series, one thing that I've heard multiple presenters say is, if you had a bad experience, address that bad experience. Don't expect your application to be rosy completely, but be very realistic. Would anyone like to elaborate on that?
I'll take it if nobody else will. You know, we're all products of our experience, and we learn things one way or another. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. I tell students when they start as an undergraduate and they go into a lab, they will ask me, how do I know if it's the perfect lab? And I have no idea. I say, if you're interested, it could be great, but after the end of a year, you may decide that was interesting. I learned a lot of things, but I don't want to work in this field of research. And that means you've learned something. That means it's not a disaster. It means that actually you've gained wisdom because you're not interested in this anymore. It's okay to write that type of statement. I think what you would state, though, is what did you learn from being in that experience? If you learned how to do lab bench work, if you learned how to be very exact in some calculations, things like that, you may decide that that's not what you want to go into, but nevertheless, you picked up those skills. And I would highlight what skills you received in that lab that you're working in.
Perfect. And to go back to you, Dave, you mentioned the panel structure, and there's a uniqueness to that. And then with that and discussing what the panel looks like, it's my understanding that if you are a physicist and you are applying for GRFP, you will not be reviewed by another physicist. It's going to be someone from a different discipline. Is that correct?
Now, I mean, if we have people in astronomy, we review them in astronomy. They just can't have a conflict of interest. So we're not assigned people from the University of Utah. We're not assigned people that we've worked with before. If we have colleagues that perhaps I'm a part of a large collaboration, somebody from that collaboration is applying, we have to recuse ourselves. So One of the things we have to sign as a reviewer is a conflict of interest disclosure. And anytime we see something that's either a personal relationship or somebody we know, a family member, we have to recuse ourselves from those considerations. So if I was teaching that student, then I would have to obviously not be part of that, discussion. Regarding the structure, like I said, we do these reviews, and these are all done by emails initially. And they do a calculation of the average. Usually, I think they have at least 3, but typically 4 to 5 people reviewing them. They try to guarantee at least 3 though. And then they'll take an average of the scores. And then they do something interesting. They use something called Z-scores, which is they figure out what the panelists' average score is. And they look at the fluctuations of whether you scored above your average or below. And they use that fluctuation to rank your proposal. It's not just the absolute number, but it's actually the fluctuation around it. Then they'll get a panel score, and they'll actually then, for the entire panel of 200 or 300 people in your panel, you'll have a score from the lowest to the highest. And the discussion centers, that the top ones we never talk about because they generally are just going to be accepted. And the bottom ones, generally, we just don't talk about them because the interesting ones are the ones in the middle, because they could go either way. You could say that this one maybe had one of the persons was a little bit overly critical, maybe not. And so then you go into breakout rooms. You actually will identify ones which have a large standard deviation, and they're somewhere at the borders. And so that's roughly where the conversations happen. We have a number of meetings over several days looking at the ones which have a lot of fluctuations or discrepancies between the different panelists, and then decide whether we should agree on something or try to resolve those issues and either raise the scores or lower the scores as appropriate. The last thing that's done is they give us an opportunity after the panel's done to say, I think there's one that is really underappreciated and you haven't thought about it, and it's this one, and this is why. You can be from anywhere. It could be any score, but something you read over that you thought was really, really good. And they'll look at that, and they may not pull it up, or they may actually, if they see the things that you see, and if you're persuasive enough as a panelist, they may actually award that, jump them up above several levels if the National Science Foundation sees the same things that you see. So they're always seeking, the panel's opinion, but they're also seeking individual opinions in this as well. So it's an extensive process, but it's really a valuable thing because it's not just done by raw numerical scores.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So Anthea mentioned in the question about reviews that an application should not only be reviewed, it should be extensively reviewed by many, many people before you hit the submit button. Nikki, you very recently went through this process. Can you tell us a little bit about what that writing process went by? This isn't something that you just write the night before, proofread and hit submit. This is, you spend a lot of time on this and you have a lot of people reviewing. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
I may not be the best person to ask this because I actually only started mine 3 weeks before it was due. I was really behind the 8 ball on it. So I was working at a nonprofit at the time and got really lost in some projects and dropped the ball. But mostly you really want to start developing your idea in July and August, have everything sort of written in September. I think they're still due at the end of October, I believe, and get them out. And luckily my current advisor was really helpful and reviewed my paper 6 times, and I had 2 friends review it 3 or 4 times. Everyone was absolutely wonderful to help me out. So it's really good to start thinking about it now over the summer when you have some free time. If you're a senior or even as a grad student, it's a long process to really try to A, develop your idea, and B, putting a research proposal into 2 pages is a lot harder than you think. Being short and succinct and really getting your point across is a lot more difficult, I think, than writing a longer proposal. So that's definitely something you want a lot of feedback on. And since you're not necessarily getting someone directly in your field, I'm not necessarily going to get plant physiologists reading mine, it needs to be written in a way that people can judge the merit of your science on a little broader scale, which is also a little difficult. So I definitely recommend starting early and getting professors to read it rather than just friends sometimes. And there's always grad students and postdocs in the labs you worked in who I'm sure would love to read it over. So that would be my recommendation, is start early and don't do what I did.
That's a great response. Thank you. I appreciate the honesty there. So with that, and this is for Nikki and of course our wonderful faculty that we have with us today, is applying something that you feel like it's all on you, or do you feel like you were successful by working hand in hand with a professor or a PI or whatnot? You mentioned that, Nikki, that you reached out to an individual that you hope to research with, you hope to work with them, but you currently were not. So how did that partnership kind of look?
Yeah, I got really lucky that Dr. Anderegg, who I want to work with, his postdoc advisor was my undergrad thesis advisor. So I kind of had a connection there. So I felt really comfortable reaching out to him. So initially I was like, I'm looking to work in your lab and apply for this GRFP. And here's like my initial idea. And he sent me, papers. He's like, okay, like read these over and let me know what kind of projects come to mind. And, I'm sure there are some professors out there who are like, sorry, I don't have time to like really sit with you and help you develop this. Luckily, he had no current grad students at the time, which was, beneficial for me. But I definitely think if you're working in a lab currently, or you have other professors who you've done research with, it's really good to reach out to them or other grad students, just even to get the ball rolling or talking about research projects, and they might know the field a little better and know some like unanswered questions and lead you in the right direction. And it's definitely worth, especially as a senior, you might not necessarily know what direction you want to go in. And again, with these proposals, you're not held to doing the exact research you propose, but it's still worth developing the skill set to plan out your questions and your study and what you want to do, even if you don't end up going exactly in that direction when you start grad school. And it will help you with your interviews too when you interview for grad school, because you all have ideas to talk about.
Absolutely, thank you. So broader impacts has come up a few times, and Anthea, your last workshop that you did 3 weeks ago on this was very, very informative. About one thing that stuck out to me was your broader impact should not solely be, I'm going to do this research and I'm going to write an article and I'm going to impact scholarship, but it's much more action-based. What are you going out into the community and accomplishing outside of the college campus? Can you elaborate a little bit on that, on those kind of action points?
Yeah, so I think that, as a reviewer, oftentimes people hear, students and applicants see broader impacts, and we haven't really been taught in any of our classes to think about the societal impacts of our research, but this is incredibly important to the National Science Foundation. So as students, when we're first starting out, we do our experiments in whatever field we're in, and our outreach is through publication. When people talk about disseminating our results, we think, well, we'll publish it. NSF means a lot more than that when they ask about dissemination. And they, in terms of societal impact, they want you to be thinking about how your research is impactful and important to people beyond your lab community or your department community. So one of the things that the NSF sees as a really important aspect of their mission is K-12 education and the education of citizen scientists. So things that you can think about specifically are ways to bring your science into other types of classrooms, K-12 classrooms in particular, or into Science Friday type events at a pub or at a pizza place, at an old age home. Bring your work to museums. And the more creative you are, the more you're going to sort of grab your reader, right? And then I think the other big mistake that some people, and the other thing is sort of always, we should always, and I think it's especially important in the years coming up to think about inclusion and diversity, for instance. And so the other thing I just wanted to say is many of us have done things as students, and it's not, the other point I made that I think it's really important to remember is it's not what you've done in the past. It's great, shows you're passionate, but it's what you're going to be doing in terms of outreach and broader impacts during the tenure of your award that you're really being evaluated on.
Perfect, thank you. And
Can I say a couple quick words on this? Also, just the National Science Foundation requires that the intellectual merit and the broader impacts are somewhat equal. So don't dismiss the broader impacts as being a small fraction of the total score. In fact, they actually require that you give separate scores for those, and then you add them up together. And so it can have a great research proposal, but have very little broader impacts. And so then it can really affect you, even though you have a great research proposal. The other thing I would add is make sure that it's something that's reasonable. Don't extrapolate or inflate things too much. I remember one where somebody was going to be working on a lower power version of a chip that they were going to build. And they said, the broader impacts that this was going to reduce energy consumption for everybody and it'll solve the climate change crisis. And you're like, I don't see the connection. That's really, really far off. So don't really make those really huge jumps, but stay within the boundaries of what seems reasonable, what seems logical, because then people think you're just kind of just making it up. So be careful on that. Don't extrapolate too far.
Feasibility for both your intellectual merit and your broader impacts are both important.
fantastic. Nikki, as you introduced your research interests, would you mind sharing how you took that and crafted your broader impacts?
Yeah, so a lot of my broader impacts, some of it was really focused on the University of Utah specifically in terms of doing more diversity in hiring field assistants for research. And then some of it was related to more policy side of work, with working with like the US Forest Service in terms of climate change, reforestation, sort of doing outreach to some of these nonprofits and sort of helping land managers and sort of land change with climate change and forests, sort of come up with different plans on how they're going to manage their lands out west. And sort of along those lines was where we sort of went with my broader impacts, was like half policy and then half of this diversity representation in terms of getting people involved in science and doing some stuff in coordination with the Natural History Museum at the university. So since I kind of knew I really wanted to work with Bill, I kind of shaped my broader impacts around the University of Utah, which made it a little easier to be specific about what I plan to do.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing, Nikki. Tony, question for you on back to application documents. To what degree should the CV or resume be tailored? For example, should publications not be included if they're not really related to one's current research focus?
No, include all your publications. Show that you just the fact that you got something published shows that you've got some skills and knowledge that not all those applicants will have. So yeah, in fact, there's going to be a place on Fastlane for you to put in your publications and your presentations. Find a way to bring them up again in your personal statement. Don't just trust that somebody's going to see them there.
Perfect. And part B to that question I'll throw in, is there a stylistic preference? Resume over CV, CV over resume?
So you're asked to fill in the Fastlane forms, which is going to give them basic like resume information. But from there, it's the 3-page personal statement and 2-page research statement. So you're not going to be turning in like a formatted CV.
Mhm. Perfect. Thank you. So we have some people here with us today that are, some are have already decided, I'm going to go out and work on this. I'm going to apply for this coming fall. Others who are, I just don't know. I just don't know if I should even bother with this. For someone who might be sitting on the fence and not sure, Dave and the rest of our panelists, any guidance on what could tip that scale one way or another to help decide whether or not this is right for them?
So I would say for a senior, apply, because you get 2 chances, once as an undergraduate and once as a graduate student. So you might as well use your undergraduate, because that's kind of free in that sense, because you don't get another shot at it. So if you can do it during your senior year, go and do it, and you'll learn a lot by doing it. So you actually will explore your field, and you'll think a bit deeper about what you're going into. And that's going to help you out in graduate school. Once you become a graduate student, then you generally have to either do it your first year or your second year. And the second year has some very specific rules about how deep into your second year you can do it. So make sure you're familiar with that. But what we see at the in the review panels is there's not very many people applying during their first year. Most of them apply during their second year. And so they tend to be a bit more advanced and a lot more nuanced and deeper. They understand what the research problem they're going after is. They understand what the resources are, how long it's going to take them to address it. Whereas in the first year, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. The other thing is your broader impacts can be a lot stronger in your second year, because again, we talked about making a realistic broader impacts. If you say, I want to go out and teach in K-12, the first thing the panel asks is, well, have they ever taught in K-12 before? Or are they just writing this down and they have absolutely no experience? If you've had no experience and seems like you're just writing it down, then it's not really seen as a very strong broader impact. But in fact, if you've started doing some of this, or if you worked with people in the community or in your department to do some outreach during your first year, then when it comes time in the second year, you say, I've already done this, this, and this as preparation. Then people say, okay, well, then they know what they're talking about. And they're not just putting something down just for the application with no intention of doing it. So I think that's why you see a lot more in the second year. People are really trying to understand broader impacts and learn how to do those during their first year, and then integrate it for that second year application.
Can I ask a question, Dave? Since I haven't done this in the last couple of years, do they separate? 5 years ago, we used to separate the first year graduate students from the second year graduate students.
No, they're all together.
In the same playing
They're all in
field.
the same pool. So yeah, the panelists do understand a difference between a first year and a second year, but they still are spoken about in the same breath, and you actually do the scores at the same time. And so I think they do get somewhat mixed up in that sense.
I have had feedback from other students in our department that a lot of them find it easier to apply in their first year in general, just in terms of the workload and how much time they can put into an application. As just like one side note, especially in our department, we have a boot camp in the fall where we spend a couple of weeks working on all of these applications as practice, and you get feedback from everyone. But it's definitely, I've heard from other students in the department that in their second year, it kind of falls to the wayside, even though they know it's a thing they should apply to, and they do. It's just you have your qualifying exams coming up and everything, and sometimes it's a little difficult to focus as much. And sometimes it's good when you're starting as a first year and doing a lot of your background reading and stuff as your first year student in the fall to work on it then. So just a side note from other people I've heard from.
Tony, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, just kind of along the same lines of what David was saying. At the end of it, even if you feel like you've got a terrible application, you don't know who you're going to get on that panel. It is a gamble. It's like going to Vegas. If you connect with somebody and they really identify with your story and they see something in you that the other panelists don't see, there is a chance that they can argue for you. You don't get it, at least you've gone through this process of trying to realize who you are yourself as a researcher and where you're going and what you want to do with this advanced degree. So at the very end, even if you don't get it, hopefully, like me, you feel like you've come to a better understanding of who you are as a professional.
Perfect, thank you. So I think that's the last of our questions from our attendees today. So I hope we can go across the panel. So Dave, Tony, Anthea, Nikki, and any last advice that you might have, any words of wisdom that haven't already been spoken, even down to the strategy, how to pace yourself, how to not stress too much about it, but also how to give it the attention due to it. So Dave, if you want to go ahead.
So one of the things that the program officers will tell the reviewers is this is not a research proposal. Even though there's a research section, it's not a research proposal. It's a fellowship proposal. It's called Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And it's about the student. And what they want us to look for is people that we look for, that we see that there's some creativity, some spark, something that would say this person's going to be successful in the field. And we're trying to identify that. We're not trying to fund a particular line of research. Let's put it that way. The main NSF research program, people say we have to fund more fusion or have to fund this big telescope. That's not what this is about. It's not about the topic that you're in. It's about finding talented people and providing them resources to help them grow. And so the more you can write that statement about showing your passion, your interest, that you're going to be a great scientist, that's going to help you out quite a lot. For the undergraduates, I'll just add one more thing for undergraduates. I've worked with a couple NSF GRE students, and I know a lot of times they're very lost. What am I going to write about? How am I going to do this? I don't know anything about research. I'm just doing a little bit in the lab, but I really have no idea what I want to do. I would suggest you start early. I worked with a number of students starting in the springtime before, and I said, let's just go read across the field a bunch of different, very general books that are regular paper trade books, and just start reading the first couple papers that are in there, or else it could be just a general book that's, New York Times bestseller, and just tell me which one speaks to you, which one say, this is really interesting, I've got to know more about it. And then once they find that, then I have them go deeper and start looking at some of the papers that are mentioned and things like that. So again, try to, when you're first starting out, read broadly, find out what do you think is really interesting, and then trying to follow that down that path a little bit. If you've got a research advisor, they can help you out with that as well. But nevertheless, you've got to find what speaks to you, because that's going to be the easiest thing to write about. And that's the other thing that people were saying, if I've been doing research many times, that's very easy to write about because you're very familiar. So don't write a Wikipedia article or copy from Wikipedia. Speak from something that's from your heart, and not what somebody else is telling you to write.
Tony?
That's some great advice there. Hard to follow. But I would add, when you find that thing that you're passionate about, don't look to write your finished personal statement and finished research statement. Just sit down and put that down onto your computer. Write the bad personal statement, the 5-page personal statement, the 3-page research statement, and just start with basic ideas. And you're going to have, a lot of things that you're going to have to cut out, a lot of things that aren't going to make any sense, but you're going to get blocked if you feel like you've got to write the one that you're going to turn in right from the get-go. So I would start over the summer, just bullet listing ideas, the key points that are important about you as a potential PhD in the future, for your personal statement. And then, like David said, go through those books. Review articles are great to tell you what the cutting edge problems are. And then once you've got that terrible personal statement, bring it to our writing workshop. I'll put that in.
Yeah, Anthea?
Getting harder and harder to add things as we go on, but I'll try. I would just sort of say that as you are writing, make sure you don't have a lot of space, but make sure you include the rationale to what you're doing. Don't write a laundry list of things you're going to do for your broader impacts or your or your intellectual merit. Tell me why what you're doing is important. Just remember, why is it important? Why have you chosen the approach that you have? And then if you can, and this all gets to what Nikki did so well with her broader impacts, if you know where you're going to be, or you have a good idea, or writing as if you're going to be someplace, tell me how that environment is supportive, or how it makes, how the team will work and how the environment will help you achieve your goals. So, and then my last little piece of advice is NSF is a stickler for the rules. Read the instructions and follow them to a T.
Okay, Nikki, some
All right,
peer
yeah.
advice.
You guys definitely covered a lot. I'll endorse what Tony said. I call it a vomit draft of you just put everything down. It's so much easier to like cut things out later. Just get something on the page and then your brain will keep working on that, even when you're not thinking about it. And similar to what David said, just find what you're interested in. I mean, I was lucky I went to my undergraduate advisor and I was like, look, I like water and I like trees. What can I do with this? And he sort of just gave me some, he's like, look at these journals, here's some review articles, and sort of like, let me kind of develop from there. But it started out with just, I always wanted to be a marine biologist. And then I took a class in marine biology and I was like, nope, not happening. So I had to kind of come up with my new research area. And then if you have friends who are also applying for it, trade drafts back and forth, and you could really pick up on different styles of how you format things. And there's plenty of examples online. And I found it really nice to, just Google like GRFP winners. And, there's other grad students who have written guides about, bolding your intellectual merit section and just these small things that'll make your application stand out from people who have been successful. So I'd say just, as much exposure as you can. And again, just start thinking about it now and just find something you're interested in. And, and if you don't get it, it doesn't hurt. You learned how to read papers, you learned how to write a proposal, and, they're funding the student. They just want to know you can do something good in your future. So, which is really encouraging, I think, is it's an interesting program where it's different from grants you'll write later in your career where they're funding the exact science. This is really investing in you.
Fantastic. Huge thank you to Dean Kita, Dr. Butterfield, Dr. Letso, and Nikki, our current fellow, for joining us here today. Tony did just put into the chat box again his workshop sign up form. He is in the College of Engineering, but this is open, he says, to any student who is applying for the NSF GRFP. So come and join and be a part of the good vibe there. And we do have some new folks who have just registered right before this session, and some who've been with us all along. I've just put into the chat box our workshop page on our website. This contains the recordings of our previous workshops over the past couple months, including writing personal statements, broader impacts and research plan, a strategy and overview of the program. So these could be a great help for you. And I just sent it in a direct message to somebody rather than to everyone at large. Thank you, Zoom. Okay. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us. In the next couple days, we'll have this open forum up on our website as well. So if you want to, you can refer back to all the wonderful advice that has been given here today. And of course, if there's anything that we can do, the university is here for you between the Writing Center, different workshops, and the Office of Fellowships and Benefits for questions. Your faculty are here to help see you succeed as well. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. And with that, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.